Well, boys, looks like you started the fun without me.
You're all sick. Every last one of you.
We're going to need a bigger gun.
What's the matter? You scared of things that go boom, boom, boom?
Give me one goddamn reason why I shouldn't blow your goddamn brains all over that goddamn wall.
Calling all white trash freaks in a Boogaloo Down. This is Double Feature.
What is a Boogaloo Down?
You wouldn't.
My name is Eric, and I'm here with Michael.
Yeah.
And we have two movies, as always, as sometimes on the show.
As always, as sometimes, we are doing two films, and we are doing The Sessions and Moonrise Kingdom.
So this is a look at opposing development. We have someone nearing their 40s who has never been with a woman sexually. And on the completely other side of things, we have some runaways trying to enter into independence, perhaps before their time. Can I leave yet? Is it? I'm scared. Is it okay to be afraid of our show?
No.
I'm always afraid of our show.
This week is a good week to be afraid.
Again, the only two people on planet Earth, I think, that are afraid of Wes Anderson.
If you're already relishing how discombobulated your two hosts are going to become when we get to Wes Anderson, you can chapter right over all the spoilers in the sessions just to hear all the spoilers in the chapter that will be marked on the website that will begin Moonrise Kingdom.
What I was thinking is you could actually listen to the sessions, which is right up our alley, perfect for us to talk about, and then chapter over our awkward fumbling of Moonrise Kingdom. I think that would be a good idea.
Sure, and then you'll find out what we're doing for the infamous year-ender show.
Oh my God, it's the last show of the year.
Yeah.
Next time. Not this time. This time we have angelic William H. Macy. He solves the thing we were trying to talk about on The Loved Ones the other week, which was welcome to the human race. Every day somebody breaks somebody else's heart. That was essentially the core of what I think we were getting at there. Also, love is a journey is the funniest fucking
Love
line
is a journey
from this. I got nothing else. It's beautiful. So it's Ben Lewin, who himself is a polio survivor and a director I've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Director I've never heard of, always exciting to me. Doing that's sort of based on a true story, sort of, and lies thing that is Mark O'Brien this time on the show, who's a real individual who actually wrote poetry and who wrote the article on which the film was based.
Yeah.
And then there's the thing we're talking about. Also, Adam Arkin is in this movie.
Adam Arkin does do
before we roll into that.
He does a lot of sleeping before he becomes a terrible husband for a moment.
The director and actor of 1 billion TV shows.
Yes.
Adam Arkin. And this may not surprise you to learn, but was also on The West Wing. As apparently
doesn't surprise me even a little.
I want at some point for you to see an episode of The West Wing to find out it's not a giant rotating cast. It's actually about 10 people and they're just all showing up on our show for some reason. Talk to me about the plot of this. Give me your quick plot take on the movie.
Man in an iron lung decides to get laid.
All right. So I want to do the thing where we just, elephant in the room.
Yeah.
This is a very incredibly far out premise.
Yeah. And you're automatically put in that place that people always say is, oh, the weirdest stories are true life. You couldn't make this stuff up.
Well, I also just think Sundance. I think
I
go, oh yeah, it's some kind of indie film about, a guy and I don't know, an iron lung, and he's just trying to find love in the world.
I have, and this is going to seem really insensitive, but I have this thing, So Dustin Hoffman got all this acclaim for Rain Man, and
sure,
we saw Jamie Foxx get the Academy Award for Ray, and now we have John Hawkes, who got all this critical acclaim for playing Mark O'Brien, a man in an iron lung. And so before I say what I'm about to say, I do want to say that John Hawkes is one of my favorite actors. And he does a fantastically good job in anything I've ever seen him in, from Road Racers to From Dusk Till Dawn to Deadwood to Me and You and Everyone We Know to now to this. That said, is it that much harder to play a blind guy if you can see, or play a guy who's laying in a bed if you can walk around and move your arms. I get that maybe conveying certain things become more difficult if you can't move.
Sure.
But also, that's just something the audience is going to go, well, of course that's difficult to convey because you can't move.
Right.
What I really want to see is I want to see Stevie Wonder get an Oscar for playing a fucking baseball player, you know?
Yeah, simply being in an iron lung, I don't think is what deserves the acclaim here.
Right.
I mean, there was all that stuff about how he had to arc his body and that
Sure.
kind of bunk story about his chiropractor said it threw his chi out of alignment or something.
Whatever.
But I think the stuff that John should actually be given credit for is things like, you know, his delivery of humor in the film.
Right.
The entire fact that, all right, we're dealing with this movie that is, like I said, far out premise, just way, way fucking weird. Could be done in a lot of different ways. And I think all of those ways but one are distasteful.
Yeah.
And exploitative. And, you know, Todd Browning's Freaks is the infamous. Well, Todd Browning's Freaks is the infamous example of can we go exploitation and still do heartfelt?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that becomes kind of the model for a lot of stories like this. Or you go the other direction and you go, let's pretend that this is just straight up drama, that there's nothing funny to it, and that no one should snicker at the fact they just paid $12.50 to go, you know, to get a movie ticket to the film about the guy in the iron lung who's trying to have sex with a woman who's not a prostitute. It's hard to not giggle at that. I mean, I think everybody who goes to see this movie has to acknowledge that there's a little bit of giggle to it.
Sure.
But then John comes out and does, you know, the way he's portraying this character humorously and sort of with a bit of a stride to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're still feeling for the guy. I mean, I don't know what in an actor's toolkit allows you to do that, but I think it's being done here in every way that it, you know, that it needs to be.
Well, I think that I don't know if it's more of a credit to John Hawkes' performance or the writing or Mark O'Brien as a human being.
Sure.
But I think that the allowance for the character comes deeply from the fact that he's a poet.
Oh, sure. I didn't even think of that.
That he gets to view things from an artistic standpoint and then speak incredibly eloquently about his feelings on a subject.
Right.
I mean, his dialogue is written like poetry.
Right.
Everything he says comes from a place of very grounded, astute beauty.
But that could also have gone just as wrong as it went well.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's just
let me repitch this to you. A guy in an iron lung just wants to get laid, so he writes poetry. I mean,
Right.
it could be train wreck levels of disaster.
Yeah. Or you just tweak it and you go, stand-up comedian in an iron lung wants to get laid.
Right. But the film's use of humor without going for the low-hanging fruit is really the thing that makes me feel so good about it. It's
And
the fact that Mark's a funny guy,
right,
not unaware of his situation, but we're not using it, you know, for, it's not premise or absurdity jokes.
Mm-hmm.
We never really stand back to go, wow, we are in a situation where I'm hiring a woman to have sex with me and I'm in an iron lung. Weird, huh? You know, we get that on more of a micro scale where certain events might have something that's a little funny or weird about them, but we're never standing back and mocking the premise, because I think that undersells his emotional trip here.
Well, and I think that the other characters' reactions to Mark, their genuine understanding of, because let's be completely honest here, how often do you come upon somebody who's blind or, you know, they just have some sort of disability and immediately you start treating them differently.
Sure.
Based on whatever I mean,
well, sure.
You know, there are people that talk to blind people louder.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, we just had this on that other show talking about Marley Matlin.
Right. And I think that the characters in this, the priest and the sex surrogate and even the caretaker are all so human toward Mark that it allows him to be a fully well-rounded person.
Sure.
As opposed to constantly trying to compensate for the fact that they're being patronizing.
Well, and he deals with that right away. You know,
Exactly.
that's the first thing he says when he has his confession is, I want to fire this woman just because she looks at me like, like I owe her something. And so we're showing that this is a world where those characters exist. It's
Right.
much like real life, and we're just choosing to get rid of them because we don't want to do that. It also makes his priest or whatever aware that this is something he's very alert about, and that he's consciously trying to remove that from his life. It's just like the jokes. It's just like the not pretending I'm not in an iron lung. He's not pretending that there aren't people who look at him weird, and he's
Right.
he's been through this most of his life.
Well, and I think that the interesting thing about Mark as a character is what gets the film rolling is that he views his most intense handicap as the fact that he hasn't gotten laid.
Sure. Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that once it happens, he kind of feels like, oh, that didn't change anything about who I am.
Right.
Or
Right.
where I am in my life.
Sure.
Eventually, it does end up in this, probably more independently of the true story, is that is the line that wins him the woman at the end.
I think of that more of a joke, though.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
It's
I
an
agree.
icebreaker joke.
And this is also fascinating that he just graduates from college,
Sure.
and the most difficult journey in his life is making a woman come.
As I was watching this, I was thinking a little bit about, you remember the movie Fur we talked about?
Yeah.
It's one of those things is we're seeing it. It's a little bit of a challenge to watch and to think about. But another thing I like a lot about the Sessions is seeing how much of a challenge it is for the characters in his life as well as him. I actually think one of the people who struggles the least might be Mark.
Mm-hmm.
He comes into the world of this priest for the first time. And, we also see the difficulty with his surrogates. And I had just mentioned, finding assistants and firing different people and finding the right person. These people also have a really hard time dealing with Mark as well.
Sure.
They have a hard time dealing with him in the way that I think the audience does. So we get two different kinds of journeys there. We get to see the kind of journey of the regular vanilla audience member learning about some kind of social oddity. And then we also get to see that person having their own journey that we can invest in.
Mm-hmm.
But there are moments where, especially for his surrogate, that first session they have, and she's trying to get his clothes off, and he's kind of yelling in pain.
Mm-hmm.
We get that scene where she's in the bathroom kind of looking at herself. I mean, I don't know what's going through her head at that point, but you've got to be thinking like, fuck, can I do this?
Yeah.
This is something she kind of does for a living, but it still seems incredibly taxing for her.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is Mark comes into these people's lives and causes them to question their foundation.
Right.
The one thing the sex surrogate knows is that she's comfortable with sex and she wants other people to be able to experience it. The one thing that the priest knows is that he is a man of God, and God is, this way about certain tenets of the faith. The one thing that his caretaker knows is that she got this the first caretaker,
right,
or the second technically, but she's got this boyfriend and she's taking care of Mark. And suddenly Mark enters all their lives, and the sex surrogate is going, can I do this with the no strings attached attitude? Is this something I can even give to him? The priest is going, God will give you a free pass, I guess.
Well, the priest does have a lot of questions. I mean, we can get to that later if you want, but the priest does seem to have just as many worldview challenging questions about it.
Sure. And then we have the second caretaker who falls in love with him, or I guess doesn't fall in love with him.
God, I fucking hate that. I'm glad as a poet he can recognize that. It's really interesting for me to see somebody, especially somebody who's religious, play out a thought experiment on film. To go, his priest talks about it all the time, that he has these canned answers for things. That's part of his job, is just delivering this sermon, delivering this speech. I have this little knowledge bite when people ask me these things. And suddenly he's challenged with, well, is it okay to break commandments? Is it okay to go against what the Bible says because of my special circumstance, because of, the position that I'm in? And I mean, maybe this is just credit to William H. Macy, but God, do you see him very visibly struggle with that?
Oh, yeah.
There are these reaction kind of shots when Mark says things that are just fuck, I'm in over my head. I don't know. I have no idea. What do you think we should do? You know, it keeps asking him as a friend, what would you do about this or that? What do you think God would do? It's causing more of a crisis, I think, in his priest than in Mark himself.
Sure.
To go, well, what is God going to think about this? Do I get a pass? You know, these are very, very difficult, even grayer lines than the fucking Bible already has.
Right.
To think about, how do I keep inside this code? And I look at that less as a religious person and just as a person who has certain codes or guidelines they live by, and then finding an exciting new circumstance you've never thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the great reason a movie like The Sessions exists, is to explore a world you know nothing about and to see people struggle with not just the hardships, but also the kind of moral, ethical, the different questions this raises that you never would have had to think about, you know, yourself. It's one of my favorite things that film can do. I think it's one of the core purposes of film is to explore worlds you could never go to, or think about things that you've never had an excuse to think about for any other reason. Kind of figure out more about how you feel on different issues, which actually brings me to the sex surrogate.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind indulging me in a bit of hypothetical conversation.
Oh, sure.
On the topic, because that seems like something The Sessions is begging for. She makes this distinction between prostitute and sex surrogate.
Uh-huh.
And I think the work that sex surrogates do in making people comfortable with sexuality is really powerful and incredibly noble, I guess, in a way. But I also think that about sex therapy for people who don't necessarily have a disability or any type of therapeutic sexuality, or just helping people with their level of, you know, comfortability being naked or in sexual circumstances. So having said that, I mean, she draws this difference, but do you think the difference between a sex surrogate and a prostitute is arbitrary? Or do you see a reason for society to keep those in two separate kind of mental places?
Oh, man, that was a twofold question, wasn't it?
It certainly was.
No, I think that a sex surrogate is not doing the same thing as a prostitute. Let's try to dial it into a situation that's a lot easier to understand. I think that a prostitute is the Expendables, and that a sex surrogate is a war training video.
I see what you're saying.
The goal of the Expendables is you're supposed to go there, you're supposed to have a really good time, and then you're supposed to want to go back for Expendables 2 and Expendables 3, and there'll be some new tricks, and it's going to get bigger and crazier, but eventually you're going to blow your load every time. But you go to a war training video, and you come out of there with a profound respect for war and a very deep understanding for how to perform in that situation, that you will be safe and that everybody you're doing it with will be okay with that situation.
That's the intention, but this is the part that doesn't hold up for me. I mean, there's a couple parts that don't hold up for me, but let's stick with your analogy for a minute. She says the goal here is that she does not want them to continue after 6 sessions. I mean, that's the rule,
right?
But that's her distinction,
right?
I mean, that's not Mark's distinction. He would love for it to continue. And I think most people who have, you know, their first sexual experience with somebody, she even talks about how natural it is that they have a sort of post-copulation, you know, intimacy, romantic attachment. And while she says, okay, I'm just going to train you to do this, and after 6 times, you'll be able to go do it comfortably on your own, I think the person who is on the patient end of that often has those attachments. Not even necessarily unhealthy attachments. I think pretty natural attachments.
Well, yeah, I think that that's normal. I think if you're in a training situation in a class, you develop an attachment to the class, to your classmates, to being safe there as opposed to being in a real situation. So, I mean, take that even one step back. It's the same fear and excitement for graduating high school.
Mm-hmm.
Part of you is terrified because everything you've known that has been comfortable for you for the last 4 years is now about to be a thing that you will never experience again. But on the other hand, prostitutes. So,
so the actual So we can dabble in analogies a lot, but I think the thing at the root of why I feel like there's little to no distinction there, or societally there shouldn't be, I feel like very few people question sex surrogates, but the world's oldest profession of prostitution is often called into moral, ethical questions.
Okay.
Isn't there I mean, you'd have to agree there is some kind of gray line between Expendables type, no strings attached, pay for sex, want to go back and get it, and therapeutic sex. Let's even say out of the realm of rehabilitation. But there are people who are emotionally scarred in What about, let's say somebody who was a victim of some kind of brutal sexuality, rape, or just some sort of sexual assault, and they can't have sex that is pleasurable for them emotionally. So they start seeing somebody so that they can kind of get over with an impartial person the awkward, dealing with their own body and feeling clean and safe and healthy and fun about sex again.
Yeah.
That would be therapeutic.
Correct.
But that's something you might not want to do with someone you're going out with. It might be really awkward and difficult emotionally. Maybe you want to do it with a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
That's still in the line of sexual surrogate, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're not physically, it's not physically impossible for you to go meet somebody else to have sex with. So I think that blurs things a little bit.
Well, I'm not saying that you have to be in an iron lung to go to military classes.
Sure.
I'm saying you have to be in a situation where you require military training.
Okay, but where's the line? I mean, if I've cried during sex before, should I be able to see a sexual surrogate? Does that qualify me?
I
certainly have very disturbed emotional problems. And sometimes they're revealed during sex. I mean, does that make me a candidate?
I think the situation is very simple. I think if you believe you have an honest sexual problem and you contact a sexual surrogate, they're going to assess your situation, and they're either going to go, you just want to fuck something, or they're going to go, okay, maybe there's something there. And after one session, they're going to know whether to have you back for another session.
That's it's a line, I guess, best left to the professional.
I definitely think that the stigma of prostitution shouldn't be there. That's what I meant by it being a twofold question. Right. I don't think there should be a stigma.
Sure, we're both on the same page
akin to prostitution that isn't there for sex surrogates, but I definitely think that prostitution is recreational and sex surrogates is therapeutic.
There's a place in my head that, sexuality, especially as we've treated it on our show, is a very fun and very recreational thing. Can be very fun and recreational. But I think for a lot of people, it can be therapeutic as well. For our dark indie film fans, for our foreign film fans.
Sure.
I'm very close friends with a girl who was a call girl for many years. And she would tell me these stories about people that she had seen. And the thing that was, you expect weird sex party stories, and there were plenty of those too. But the thing that shocked me the most was how much these people almost couldn't have sex with people they met. They had such emotional problems. And a lot of times it would be less sex and more talking, or more companionship. Some of the things we talked about in the girlfriend experience. People pay for something like the girlfriend experience, a girl who will, sleep over and have pretend dates and you can buy her gifts, because they can't do that for free, or it's easier for them to pay money for it. And I think when you actually get closer to what happens, once the door is shut and somebody pays for a woman to sleep with them, then you notice that it's a lot closer to therapy for a lot of people than they probably want to let on. Anyways, completely off the deep end of the sessions, but interesting nonetheless. This is definitely a week where we're trying to play catch up with the rest of the world, who gets Wes Anderson, who's totally on board. And we were feeling pretty good after Miranda July last week, and we said, fuck it, let's go for it. But that's the accessibility thing. Tackle it without a plan. We're just gonna go, well, let's watch the movie. Which one? I don't know, the last fucking one, and we'll see what happens. So I wanted to talk about our avoidance right away. I don't know if much more needs to be said on that, except that we are aware that we've been doing this a long time, and Wes Anderson's one of those people that everybody writes us about.
Sure.
And we just go, I don't really, do you know anything?
Royal
I don't know.
Tenenbaums is one of those things Royal Tenenbaums is up there with Blade Runner. It's one of those movies that,
right.
The thing with Blade Runner and Royal Tenenbaums and most Wes Anderson for me is that I saw it at a time that I wasn't quite aware of film.
Sure.
But I was still in a place where I saw it knowing that it was notable. And I watched it and went, I don't see why this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And then everybody around me went, oh my God, the Royal fucking Tenenbaums.
Sure.
And I went, there's something wrong with me.
Well, let's try the getting on board thing as much as we can immediately. We'll just throw things and see what sticks. I mean, I'm watching the movie and I'm thinking about the themes I've seen of other Wes Anderson movies and some of the broader themes and some of the more narrow, just little, killing the dog type.
Yeah.
That's kind of a theme for Wes Anderson. He's very cruel to the animals, especially after I went off about pets last week. I think, I can totally get behind this guy. But when you see this movie or when you think about Wes Anderson, what do you think we can get on board with right away?
I think that Wes Anderson is a perfect double feature director because he does the things we like. He has an acting troupe. He has a recurring set of actors that come back and play quirky characters. His films are very stylized. They look very similar. He's got a definite vision. He's a writer-director.
You know his stuff when you see it.
He is the bullet list of what double feature likes in a filmmaker.
Sure.
And the result is definitely with Moonrise Kingdom, something that I like. But as we talked about last week, that doesn't stop me from trying not to like it every time.
I know there is a weird gut thing, right? Where you go, Wes Anderson, that's not my guy. I'm not on that team.
Yep.
But if we would have taken the blind taste test here, and that's something we keep trying to do over and over, is go, these people we don't like, what if we take away their name and their title and their work, which honestly is the most important, but we just go, listen to that list you rattled off, right?
Yeah.
If it's stylized, if it's got a reoccurring cast, if it's got consistent themes, and perhaps most importantly, the writer-director sort of.
Sure. Deals with taboos. It's got everything.
We talk about these all the time. We would go, sign me up for that. That sounds like who is that guy? Tell me about, Wes Anderson. I don't like him for some reason that I can't put my finger on, that I've never really spent any time actually considering. I don't go to see his movies and think, God, I really hated that. And
no,
it's just wrong. But I hear, a new Wes Anderson movie coming out, and I go, that's not my team. And I don't know why.
I put my fingers in my ears and hum for a year so that I don't have to hear about Darjeeling Limited.
Right. Why? I don't know why I did. That's wrong.
It's
I shouldn't
totally
be doing
wrong.
that at all.
It's probably good.
What the fuck is wrong with us? Moonrise Kingdom was great. I had a great time with it. I don't know what the fuck my problem is. Other thing I think we know a little bit, so we'll just try and stay in that territory, is Roman Coppola, who is the son of Francis Ford Coppola.
Okay.
A name we've heard on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody whose movies we found, he's got some roots. He's got some history in the old stab and slash. And that was somebody who I think is, it's totally unfair to start talking about Francis Ford Coppola when he has nothing to do with this movie. It's, his son.
Grasping at straws, man.
I wanted to bring him up more specifically for being another example of a director where I think both you and I went, Francis Ford Coppola, he's like one of those film guys. I don't care about
Now,
that.
right? Yeah, that's scary.
But then we saw the conversation and we went, oh, fucking brilliant. This is great. This is right up our alley. It's got some brief horror moments. We found out about Dementia 13 and did that on our show.
Mm-hmm.
And we went, oh, never mind. This is totally our guy.
Sure.
Roman Coppola, he did a lot of second unit with Francis Ford Coppola, so we might have seen a little of his stuff. But he's also worked with Wes Anderson a lot before. And he brings a lot to the writing of this movie. Things like the, their mother on a megaphone, events that actually happened in Roman Coppola's life, which are pretty amazing to think about. Francis Ford Coppola's wife running around with a bullhorn.
Mm-hmm.
So the next most comfortable thing for me, if people haven't picked up on this yet, we're not going to get a lot to the content of the film, but this is something that it's, treading lightly, one foot in front of the other. I want to talk about the visual treatment.
That is probably for me the most obvious thing in a Wes Anderson movie.
So we've dived in pretty deep into visual aesthetics in films. We're starting to pick up a lot of subtlety and a lot of nuance. And I know that's me being gabby about cameras, but now we have the ability to go back to somebody who's widely understood as a visual director by people who aren't, 10 levels deep into staring at camera lenses and so forth.
Right.
I'm curious to kind of get your take about it as somebody who only by contrast has to be slightly less visually oriented of the two of us. You're still a fairly visually oriented person, but I'm curious to hear what you think the sort of the visual hallmarks are of a movie like this and his other stuff.
Well, I know the big thing that that I think everybody knows about Wes Anderson is the color palettes. That every single one of his films follows a specific 6 or 7 color palette. I think it's a meme now.
Is it a meme? I have seen that before. I didn't. Yeah, it had been so long ago. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so there's the color palettes where the films all live in the same color scheme, and that ties everything together, and it downplays a lot of what could be a really vibrant visual aesthetic, and instead gives it a very tame and controlled look, which I think is a perfect contrast to things like children getting struck by lightning.
Yeah, the color palette is something that we don't talk a lot about visually, but controlling your color palette down to just a few different, multiple shades of a few different colors does give your film a really, really striking look. And especially when they're muted colors, like you mentioned here. I mean, I think brown is always on that palette. It's actually just a game of how many shades of brown.
It's always earth tones. Wes Anderson walks outside in September and pulls like 5 leaves off a tree and goes, "This is my color palette."
I just think it's really striking visually. I think more people should do that. I love seeing things in a color palette. It's hard because you have to think about your film so carefully to guard that those other colors aren't there, and then also in your color grading. My natural instinct when I see a Wes Anderson film is to get out my eyedropper tool and pick out the white and instantly balance it and ruin his, his aesthetic choice. You don't see those kind of pure whites in Wes Anderson movies. You see that tint to throw things back into the palette. So even white is being considered inside that, shifted inside that palette.
And this is another thing that it ruins everything that we know about film. He ignores the rule of thirds to every degree.
Right.
He throws it in the center and then he pans backwards. It's never from right to left. It's never from left to right. It's always, we'll put things in the middle and then we'll go backwards so that more things land in the middle.
Yeah.
If there are 2 things, they will be equally distanced from the middle.
Right.
It's really interesting in this film because it opens on a painting, which for me is always just, with Moonrise Kingdom specifically, every scene is set up more like a painting than it is a film. It's all kind of Rockwellian photographs.
Sure.
It's the Norman Rockwell photo shoot. I know I understand he does paintings. Let's not. It's the Norman Rockwell photo shoot between him saying, "Everybody freeze, I'm about to take a picture."
Actually, I can think of 2 instances where the camera is panning left or right that are used in a really distinct way. We get into the home, and this is, I think, kind of a staple for Anderson, is moving fluidly from one room to another. We're kind of getting a tour, and it's sweeping seamlessly. We see the same when there's a tour of the Scouts.
Sure.
They're all in line. It's a long line. We're just going booth to booth. The amount of setup that must go into that is astonishing. Everything is a camera rig. Only for maybe 2 or 3 scenes in the whole movie does it seem like we get a Steadicam or anything handheld. It's all on tripods, on mounts, on things that can move fluidly. The amount of forethought that goes into that, it does put it back in the realm of paintings. We're very carefully considering, we're almost pencil sketching the live action scenes as we're filming them. We're going through what's kind of Kubrick levels of meticulous.
Sure.
I was reminded of Kubrick, I think toward the end, even the scene with the animal masks on the balcony.
Yeah.
And the zooms when social services first arrives. It's kind of like that Eyes Wide Shut scene we talked about. But more just in the detail and the amount of setup. It seems like it would take an eternity to fucking film this stuff. each scene is, when you have stuff on rigs like that, there's no just kind of get the camera up there and point it at where the action is. When you shoot handheld, that's something I like a lot about the Handycam movies we've strangely gotten away from. I don't know why. We got to find some more of those. That you just kind of go where the action is and you try and line up the shots. It's a living art piece. You're going, all right, everybody run around and try and hit your marks, and I'm going to generally throw the camera in this area and correct it a little bit, immediately when I see it. It's almost documentary style, where this is everybody has to be dead on these marks. The camera's going to sit right here, and then it's math, Right. It's going to move from this kind of framing to this kind of framing at exactly this time when these movements occur. And so you get these scenes that are almost like mini plays. A guy narrates to the camera, steps forward, flicks on a light on the camera. We rotate the camera 90 degrees to an entirely new framing that had to be set up before the camera was on it. We narrate, step forward, light off, boat comes from the left side of the frame. It's just this perfect, almost Rube Goldberg kind of setup to a scene. For people who aren't very visual, or maybe they've never seen a Wes Anderson movie, that's also a possibility, I suppose, or they don't know what we're talking about. The scene where they have the letters back and forth. I think Wes Anderson movies in general have the ability, they don't always use it. Sometimes the takes are a little longer, but they can cover a lot of ground very quickly. We don't stay in the same places.
Sure.
We don't. I guess I'll speak specifically to Moonrise Kingdom since that's what's in front of us. But look at like their adventure along the trail.
Yeah.
They're in a different part of the woods. They're in a different landscape. They're inside a tent. Even when we can't actually get out of the woods, we're going to go, well, let's stay inside this tent for a while. So we're mixing up visually where we're at all the time, and we don't stay anywhere very long. We keep moving from place to place. I think the letters are really emblematic of that, the way they go back and forth. It's a good example. We get a sentence and a half, and we don't leave the audience any time to get bored. I think that's one of the things people like about Wes Anderson movies is that ability to go from one thing to another. We read the first sentence and a half and we go, okay, we get this letter, toss it aside, and move on to the next letter. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the music, because I think that's another component of the movie that's really important, but I am so fucking out of my league that you have to, again, by contrast, at least be slightly less outside of your league than I am.
There's two big things with the music that I think are notable. And the first is the piece that's going on right at the beginning of the film. The thing where they're talking about deconstructing the orchestra and how if you put it all together, it sounds like one thing, but here are the different things all happening.
It's as if it's a metaphor for the film,
it's
Michael.
A very obvious metaphor.
We should also say Wes Anderson pretty accessible too. This might be the most accessible person we've ever been afraid of.
Yeah.
I think it's because I'm afraid to not understand any single piece of this.
So it's there's that, but then following that, it's pretty much just Hank Williams songs that play on the radio, and it's I know that Kalijah plays like 3 or 4 times throughout the film, which is it's an old Hank Williams song about a wooden Indian.
Sure. It's
weird, but it's also kind of interesting because the film is set in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it's odd because we get films that we would maybe call period pieces, or, films set back in time. And the only time I can think of a film that is set back, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that I didn't sit there and go, yeah, I know, because I get it. It looks that way. And there's a reference to the president at the time. And
right.
Is The Devil's Rejects, which is another film that's in the 70s, and halfway through the movie, I don't even care because the plot of a film in the 70s is exactly as intriguing and investive as a film from 2013. They just don't have cell phones.
Sure, right.
That's the difference. If you set your film back in time, it allows you to do 2 things, and Wes Anderson takes full advantage. Nobody has a cell phone, and you can talk about events that are going to happen in the location that which they have that weird Bob Balaban, the narrator, where he's talking about how 3 days from now there's going to be a storm.
Sure. Storms are coming,
and I think
it's called some foreshadowing,
right? And I think that I don't know really if Hank Williams has much more to do with the film other than kind of giving it a very grassroots, old time feel to it. Hank Williams is particularly notable for being a voracious drug user and alcoholic who eventually died at a fairly young age.
Sure.
I don't know how that applies to Moonrise Kingdom.
Right. Well, yeah, I was more curious about the impact on the feeling of the film the music has, and so I'm glad to hear you think that that's one of the critical components. It sounds like is it makes the film feel a certain way. I mean, a lot of it seems. Would you attribute a lot of that feeling to the music?
Yeah, I think I attribute a lot of it to the music and a lot of it to everybody wearing tan.
Oh, right.
And you know what else is the
maybe you found a reason for the color palette,
right?
It sets a mood.
I also attribute it to children running away and not bringing electronics.
Yeah, sure.
Books,
right?
Carrying books anywhere. Things like mentioning a library,
right? It
puts the film in this temporal state of permanence.
Whoa.
Which is, I know, like a total oxymoron, but the film isn't going anywhere.
Right.
However, time is going to move forward.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but it's one of the things that another theme in a lot of Wes Anderson stuff is kind of absent parents. I don't want to necessarily say running away, but that's something that I don't know if I have a lot to say on it other than to endorse it. That great childhood idea of almost being an empowerment film, being these two kids met each other and they're going to get the fuck out of here.
Right.
A runaway film. And seeing that adventure unfold and trying to set a certain mood for that so it doesn't just become, I mean, that's not the only thing about Moonrise Kingdom. That's why we're able to talk about all these other things.
Right.
But the visual palette and the sound lend itself to setting the kind of tone for the adventure where it's not scary. All the adults are concerned the whole time. Everybody's trying to find these kids. It's really frightening.
Dogs are dying.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, with different color and different sound, this could be an entirely different movie.
If this were a Marcus Nispel movie, the guy who did the first Texas Chainsaw remake,
sure.
Can you imagine the gravity of this film if Marcus Nispel did this movie?
That's what I'm talking about. We could make
There'd be wolves everywhere, just wolves.
The whole thing in really light blue and green tones.
Yeah,
and with an edgier soundtrack, or even just silence,
Mm-hmm.
and no color grading. Just raw coming out of the camera right off the film. I don't think the movie would feel as warm and adventurous.
Sure.
And you wouldn't quite be rooting for
everybody
for the success of the Runaways. But yeah, you're right. Really, everybody in the film.
There's no unlikable characters in this film. Do you realize that?
Even the bumbling characters.
The bumbling characters, social services, who comes in as a fucking monkey wrench. You're like, yeah, but she's a good time.
Yeah, right.
Tilda Swinton's kind of kicking ass.
Yeah, you can't fault social services because if you're really going to stop and think about anything in the movie, social services is probably the one that it's actually in the right.
There's the only character that you can even begin to dislike is the one scout who has it out for the protagonist.
Oh, who has to be the foil.
Right.
Yeah, but even him, I mean, he's got his, he's a little fucking kid. It doesn't even matter.
Exactly.
He certainly has his moments. I wanted to bring this up too and just kind of save it for last, but you had mentioned to me in terms of approachability that you think this actually has a lot in common with John Waters, who we just talked about a couple shows ago.
I think that this is the other aspect of Wes Anderson that I love, and it's the fact that these films are comedies.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely comedies. We
had
a few films ago talked about this could be a comedy dressed as a drama, dressed as, depending on how you look at palindromes. Right. So it was palindromes. But I think that this has so much in common with the old trasho John Waters movies.
Right.
We have an ensemble cast, a group of people that we always like to see coming back. The difference is the budget and the fact that we're not trying to be terribly obscene and get a rush from people.
Sure.
But you have the same kind of dumb jokes. All the jokes are dumb.
Sure.
They are lowbrow jokes in a tuxedo.
Right.
The
which, I mean, things that we would generally rally against, but we love for John Waters.
Sure. The thing that I'm kind of specifically thinking about is Ed Norton's character entirely is just a
Right.
John Waters character, but instead of being some ugly person in a fucking baby suit, is Ed Norton. And we're all like, oh, Ed Norton's a nice, clean guy.
Yeah, right.
He's smoochy.
Right.
And then we also have Frances McDormand and Bill Murray's character, the married lawyers,
Sure.
who refer to each other as counselor.
I think this might be the first time we've ever seen Bill Murray on our show. There's a whole legend and lore to
Yeah.
Bill Murray. We need to discuss at some point too.
We'll do Garfield.
Well, we should do more Wes Anderson stuff.
That's
but
true.
There's a cast that's. I think this is also the first one that doesn't have Owen Wilson. in
Right.
some
It's also one
capacity.
of the earlier or one of the few that Owen Wilson didn't have a hand in writing.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
I didn't know about that. And then Jason Schwartzman, and there's a little bit of Adrian Brody and some other Wes
Yeah.
Anderson stuff. Although, to be honest with you, I'm not sure how much. But yeah, definitely an ensemble cast. Very Dreamlanders kind of cast.
I mean, it's kind of ragtaggy. Everything that's going on is so what we've talked about with John Waters is totally apropos for this film. Is the early Dreamlander stuff was, I don't know, look in the newspaper, what happened?
Right.
This is a film about some runaway scouts that ended up getting into a bunch of trouble that, you know, it was a dangerous night because of a storm. This is
Right.
this is a 2-column newspaper blurb told
Right.
with an ensemble cast through a comedic lens, and all the characters are kind of oblivious to what's going on. How is that not John Waters?
No, you're right. It is.
Except for the fact that nobody is a transvestite.
Well, most importantly, I feel like these are all friends making a film.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think that's a lot of what people. I mean, I've asked people about Wes Anderson being a person I don't know very well, and a lot of them echo that idea that, well, he and Bill Murray like making movies. You know, Bill Murray is notorious for not doing films he doesn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You see all the same people appear over and over in his movies. He's got Bruce Willis in here, who's increasingly gaining a reputation of hard to work with
Mhm.
as an actor. And so all these people are coming together and they're putting on their goofy little movie where they all look like they're in on the joke. You know, you also hear stories about all of these weird things weird roles they took on the movie that they weren't really hired for.
Right.
People doing certain editing jobs or bringing their own costumes or, you know, having a big slumber party at the mansion, all these
Mhm.
different things you hear about, you know, a movie like Moonrise Kingdom where they're chipping in because everybody feels like the film is their baby.
Right.
That's another one of those John Waters things I love, and I think that's probably something we'll see a lot more with Wes Anderson as we figure out more of these movies.
So we have this website that would be doublefeatureshow.com. There's a little column on the side of that website which will now contain Wes Anderson.
Oh, actually, you need 2 movies to go in that column.
Well, maybe sometime next year because we get a whole year now.
We do,
But
yeah, we do.
That's not going to be before we do our notorious year-ending shows.
So I think this year's show should just be without comments, and we can discuss a little bit next time what happened here.
All right, we're doing RoboCop and Bicentennial Man. Watch more fucking film.
Bye.
Well, boys, looks like you started the fun without me.
You're all sick. Every last one of you.
We're going to need a bigger gun.
What's the matter? You scared of things that go boom, boom?
Give me one goddamn reason why I shouldn't blow your goddamn brains all over that goddamn wall.
Calling all white trash freaks in a boogaloo down. This is Double Feature.
What is a boogaloo down?
You wouldn't.
My name is Eric, and I'm here with Michael.
Yeah.
And we have 2 movies, as always, as sometimes on the show.
As always, as sometimes, we are doing 2 films, and we are doing The Sessions and Moonrise Kingdom.
So this is a look at opposing development. We have someone nearing their 40s who has never been with a woman sexually. And on the completely other side of things, we have some runaways trying to enter into independence, perhaps before their time. Can I leave yet? Is it? I'm scared.
It's
Is it
gonna
okay
be-
to be afraid of our show?
No,
I'm always afraid of our show.
this week is a good week to be afraid.
Again, the only 2 people on planet Earth, I think, that are afraid of Wes Anderson.
If you're already relishing how discombobulated your 2 hosts are going to become when we get to Wes Anderson, you can chapter right over all the spoilers in the sessions just to hear all the spoilers in the chapter that will be marked on the website that will begin Moonrise Kingdom.
What I was thinking is you could actually listen to the sessions, which is on the movie.
Man in an iron lung decides to get laid.
All right. So I want to do the thing where we just, elephant in the room.
Yeah.
This is a very incredibly far out premise.
Yeah. And you're automatically put in that place that people always say is, oh, the weirdest stories are true life. You couldn't
Sure.
make this stuff up.
Well, I also just think Sundance, I think can.
I
go, oh yeah, it's some kind of indie film about, a guy and I don't know, an iron lung, and he's just trying to find love in the world.
I have, and this is going to seem really insensitive, but I have this thing. So Dustin Hoffman got all this acclaim for Rain Man, and
Sure.
we saw Jamie Foxx get the Academy Award for Ray, and now we have John Hawkes, who got all this critical acclaim for playing Mark O'Brien, a man in an iron lung. And so before I say what I'm about to say, I do want to say that John Hawkes is one of my favorite actors, and he does a fantastically good job in anything I've ever seen him in, from Road Racers to From Dusk Till Dawn to Deadwood to Me and You and Everyone We Know, to now to this. That said, is it that much harder to play a blind guy if you can see, or play a guy who's laying in a bed if you can walk around and move your arms? I get that maybe conveying certain things become more difficult if you
the way he's portraying this character humorously and sort of with a bit of a stride to him, and then you're still feeling for the guy. I mean, I don't know what in an actor's toolkit allows you to do that, but I think it's being done here in every way that it needs to be.
Well, I think that I don't know if it's more of a credit to John Hawkes' performance or the writing or Mark O'Brien as a human being.
Sure.
But I think that the allowance for the character comes deeply from the fact that he's a poet.
Oh, sure. I didn't even think of that.
That he gets to view things from an artistic standpoint and then speak incredibly eloquently about his feelings on a subject.
Right.
I mean, his dialogue is written like poetry.
Right.
Everything he says comes from a place of very grounded, astute beauty. But
that could also have gone just as wrong as it went well.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's just.
Let me repitch this to you. A guy in an iron lung just wants to get laid, so he writes poetry. I mean, it could be train wreck levels of disaster.
Yeah. Or you just tweak it and you go, stand-up comedian in an iron lung wants to get laid.
Right. But the film's use of humor without going for the low-hanging fruit is really the thing that makes me feel so good about it. It's the fact that Mark's a funny guy.
Right.
Not unaware of his situation, but we're not using it, for, it's not premise or absurdity jokes.
Mm-hmm.
We never really stand back to go, wow, we are in a situation where I'm hiring.
Can't move.
Sure.
But also, that's just something the audience is going to go, well, of course that's difficult to convey because you can't move.
Right.
What I really want to see is I want to see Stevie Wonder get an Oscar for playing a fucking baseball player,
Yeah, simply being in an iron lung, I don't think is what deserves the acclaim here.
Right.
I mean, there was all that stuff about how he had to arc his body and that kind of bunk story about his chiropractor said it threw his chi out of alignment or something.
Whatever.
But I think the stuff that John should actually be given credit for is things like, his delivery of humor in the film.
Right.
The entire fact that, all right, we're dealing with this movie that is, like I said, far out premise. Just way, way fucking weird.
Uh-huh.
Could be done in a lot of different ways. And I think all of those ways but one are distasteful.
Yeah.
And exploitative. And, Todd Browning's Freaks is the infamous... well, Todd Browning's Freaks is the infamous example of can we go exploitation and still do heartfelt?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that becomes kind of the model for a lot of stories like this. Or you go the other direction and you go, let's pretend that this is just straight up drama, that there's nothing funny to it, and that no one should snicker at the fact they just paid $12.50 to go, to get a movie ticket to the film about the guy in the iron lung who's trying to have sex with a woman who's not a prostitute. It's hard to not giggle at that. I mean, I think everybody who goes to see this movie has to acknowledge that there's a little bit of giggle to it.
Sure.
But then John comes out and right up our alley. Yeah. Perfect for us to talk about. And then chapter over our awkward fumbling of Moonrise Kingdom. I think that would be a good idea.
Sure, and then you'll find out what we're doing for the infamous year-ender show.
Oh my God, it's the last show of the year.
Yeah.
Next time. Not this time. This time we have angelic William H. Macy. He solves the thing we were trying to talk about on The Loved Ones the other week, which was welcome to the human race. Every day somebody breaks somebody else's heart. That was essentially the core of what I think we were getting at there. Also, love is a journey is the funniest fucking
Love
line
is a journey
from this. I got nothing else. It's beautiful. So it's Ben Lewin, who himself is a polio survivor and a director I've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Director I've never heard of, always exciting to me. Doing that sort of based on a true story, sort of, and lies thing that is Mark O'Brien this time on the show, who's a real individual who actually wrote poetry and who wrote the article on which the film was based.
Yeah.
And then there's the thing we're talking about. Also, Adam Arkin is in this movie.
Adam Arkin does do
before we roll into that.
He does a lot of sleeping before he becomes a terrible husband for a moment.
The director and actor of 1 billion TV shows.
Yes.
Adam Arkin. And this may not surprise you to learn, but was also on The West Wing, as apparently.
Doesn't surprise me even a little.
I want at some point for you to see an episode of The West Wing to find out it's not a giant rotating cast. It's actually about 10 people, and they're just all showing up on our show for some reason. Talk to me about the plot of this. Give me your quick plot take.